Well, welcome everybody, and thank you for coming, and welcome to our session on land trusts as partners in ecological restoration. My name is Jason Clermont. I'm with the Buzzards Bay Coalition. I'm the restoration coordinator there, and also coordinate and lead the Buzzards Bay Watershed Restoration Partnership as well. I'm here with my co-hosts and co-presenters, Colleen Andrews from the Mattapoisett Land Trust. She's the operations manager there, and Cynthia Henshaw, executive director of the East Quabbin Land Trust. So today's session is really designed to give an understanding of what we mean when we say ecological restoration. A lot of us that are steeped in it assume others know what it means, right? And that's an assumption that we need to really retract and be sure there's a good definition out there. We also want to talk about how land trusts can get involved, either more involved or start to get involved in ecological restoration and the role that land trusts can play. And then Colleen and Cynthia will give us some examples of land trusts actually leading large restoration projects. And then we'll kind of come back and have a discussion, hopefully, with all of you involved in the examples of some of the challenges and how we can overcome some of those challenges as land trusts look to both conserve land and potentially look for opportunities to do ecological restoration on those lands. And we'll round it out in a positive way and facilitate a discussion on solutions there. Now, I don't expect us to come out of this talk with solutions for every challenge, but at least get the gears turning. It's really great to have a wide-ranging conference like this and get ideas from all over the state, because I think our ideas and the challenges that we have are different in different parts of the state. I introduced myself. I don't think we have quite time to go around the room, but can I just get a show of hands from people who came from sort of western and central Massachusetts? All right, great. That's a good contingent. Now I'd expect that way out here, right? How about North Central? Do we have anybody from Merrimack River Valley, Concord, Ipswich, Parker River? Excellent, excellent, good representation. How about Boston River, Charles River, North Shore? Excellent, we do have. All right, sweet. Taunton River, 10 Mile River, where I live. Excellent, thank you. All right, thanks for being here. Me too, kind of. Not where I work, but where I live. Buzzards Bay. All right, Cape and the Islands. All right, so we are fully represented in this room, which is awesome, because when we get to the discussion part, southeastern Massachusetts has a lot of opportunity for cranberry bog restoration. Land trusts own some cranberry bogs. Not so much in western and central, right? But western and central Massachusetts has a lot of streams and culverts. So there's a lot of experience to draw on there from that side of the state too. So, we're going to talk about partnerships and regional partnerships, but getting together occasionally here in a statewide fashion where we have such differences in expertise, or we have different expertise to draw upon in the state, is really valuable. So I've said the term quite a bit already in the 2 minutes I've been talking. Ecological restoration, what is it? In the very basic sense, it is restoring ecological function to an altered ecosystem. Now that most frequently entails addressing a stressor on that ecosystem. That stressor could be a dam, it could be an altered wetland, a small undersized culvert. So addressing that stressor to try to enhance and restore ecological function to an ecosystem. Now, there is a gradient of cost and complexity of ecological restoration efforts and projects, starting at things like invasive species removals, which I think is, from a land trust perspective, probably one of the more common efforts land trusts undertake themselves, as well as things like plantings, riparian plantings, riparian buffer zone plantings, things like that. These are actual restoration projects that can be done with a minimum of cost and complexity. You can have volunteers to alleviate capacity concerns. And then as we go along the gradient, it goes all the way up to large-scale construction projects, dam removals, large-scale wetland restorations, things like that. So there's a real gradient of costs. And there is an opportunity for land trusts to lead with limited capacity, lead these large, impactful projects. And we'll talk about that in a little bit when Cynthia and Colleen present their projects they're leading. The benefits of ecological restoration are really important to keep in mind. And I'll tell you why a little bit more in a minute, why it's really. My vice president of watershed protection likes to remind me all the time that if I don't have permission from the landowner or the site owner, I do not have a project, and he is correct. There is no restoration happening if you don't have permission to even start engineering and thinking about a restoration project on that site. So site control, otherwise known as landowner permission, is number one priority in restoration projects. Another thing that can stop restoration projects in their tracks is opposition from the community. So getting that social acceptance or community support for that is really critical. Other things that are challenges to restoration projects, but have a little easier solutions or pathways to solutions or capacity, resources, and of course built infrastructure, right? When we talk about ecological restoration, it's important to remember we're not necessarily looking back to pre-colonial times or even further than that and trying to attain that. We're just simply looking to restore ecological function in the current environment, because a lot of times, we'll say take a dam removal project, for instance, there's a lot of roads and houses that might have been put in that floodplain after the dam was already up. So that has to be a big consideration. So we can't necessarily, in an ideal situation, okay, we'd find houses, move the houses, get the houses out of there. But a lot of times that is a big constraint to the ecological restoration we do. So we'll do the best we can to restore, remove the dam to the extent practicable to be able to allow fish to get up there, flood storage in the floodplain, whatever it may be. So it is a constraint. Now the first two constraints, landowner permission and social acceptance, are really where land trusts, especially local land trusts, can play a significant role in advancing ecological restoration. Another constraint, and I think this, I'm guessing, and I'd really love to hear from those of you in local land trusts and in that sphere, I think another constraint is when people think about ecological restoration, they might see this, a construction project, disruption to the land. This is temporary. It yields long-term benefits, but it does require effective and good communication with members, with the board, with donors, with people who are involved in the land trust to kind of see past this phase, because on the other end, all the beautiful before and after pictures that we love, right? I mean, you take an old dilapidated dam here, and then after, it's a beautiful, publicly accessible place where they can come and enjoy, the fruits of our labor, right? Another one, a cranberry bog, and you can see the river running right through the middle of that cranberry bog, inaccessible, and that restoration was a huge effort out in Plymouth, Mass, to just restore that entire run of that river to a nice floodplain and how we feel it's supposed to look, but also a more ecologically functional wetland river environment and floodplain. So it's really great projects. I'm going to step out of the presentation just really quickly here. I just want to show you this series of slides. So this is a dam out in it's the Pilchuck Dam out in Granite Falls, Washington. So this was a dam removal project. Now, I think for anybody, a lot of people looking at this, is beautiful, right? It's a dam in the middle of a forest. It's a nice running river there. If you're looking at this through a restoration lens, you focus on that dam and you wonder how many miles upstream can the salmon and other anadromous fish not get to that dam is a barrier to them reaching their spawning grounds upstream. There's 38 miles upstream, and that is a barrier too. But I'll admit it's beautiful, right? It's a beautiful spot. If you came down here to go fishing, I mean, it's really a lovely spot. A local tribe there, in collaboration with NOAA and some other funders, undertook a project to remove that dam. During the course of that project, it looked like this in the middle of the summer. So if somebody came down there, right, that looks like, what's going on here? Are these pipes going to stay here? Is this stone all around here? But a little later in that summer, around September, it went from June to September, I think 2021. So not a long period, a very temporary disturbance, and this was the end result, right? Kind of the same, just without the dam. I mean, that quickly. So I wanted to show you this just to illustrate the communication that can happen to those that where the choke point of land trust getting involved in ecological restoration is really the disturbance to the land. I mean, shining star properties with beautiful trails and a lot of use, it's admittedly difficult to restrict access and do construction to replace a couple culverts on there that will allow sea-run brook trout or alewife or river herring to reach their spawning grounds. But from an ecological sense, it's extremely important, and being able to communicate that to members and donors and board members and staff is extremely important. Back to our regularly scheduled program. Okay. How can land trusts get involved in ecological restoration, either directly or indirectly bring expertise? One of the most effective ways that we've seen lately is through partnerships. So I lead and coordinate the Buzzards Bay Watershed Restoration Partnerships. It's one of 3 partnerships currently supported by Massachusetts DER. There are 2 others in the Housatonic Valley. Did I get it right? Housatonic Valley, and also the Merrimack River Valley as well. So there are 3 currently supported by Massachusetts DER. If there are any land trusts here in any of those regions that you're not involved in the partnership, I encourage you to seek the people and reach out and get involved in that. For our partnership and for all partnerships, the real impetus and purpose is to raise the capacity to do ecological restoration sort of watershed wide or in a regional sense. There's a real regional focus to this. It's not focused explicitly on any one project, although projects are starting to trickle out of these efforts, and great projects are starting to trickle out of these efforts. The regional focus for the Buzzards Bay Watershed Restoration Partnership spans 14 communities. It's important to also say Buzzards Bay Coalition also works on Cape and the Islands on the Buzzards Bay side. The partnership is more focused on from the Sagamore Cape Cod Bridge to Westport, but the coalition does work on the Cape and the Islands on the Buzzards Bay side as well. The partnership is made up of a variety of stakeholders, from municipalities, local Department of Public Works, town engineers, state, county, and federal agencies. The tribes are involved, as well as, of course, local land trusts, right? And local land trusts, and I would say along with municipalities and the DPWs who own the culverts, own the roads, and the land trusts are the keystone to these partnerships, are really the keystone. So let's talk a little bit about why, the sort of the land trust restoration connection. Like what can land trusts offer ecological restoration space or offer these partnerships? There's the most obvious one, and that is opportunity to do restoration on your lands, right? So one of the first activities that our partnership undertook was a GIS analysis or GIS prioritization of potential restoration opportunities in the Buzzards Bay watershed. So dams, culverts, wetlands, coastal wetlands. What we did is we found all of them that we could, mapped them, and then overlaid, anadromous fish runs. They run through these culverts. Is there biomap habitat here? Is there cold water streams? So we did this pretty extensive analysis. This is the result of some of that, the blue and sort of the red coastal wetlands here, overlaid on I would say probably most of the land trust holdings in the Buzzards Bay region, which is the sort of orange outlined in black there. And you can see overlap, right? And this overlap represents opportunity for high priority ecological restoration on land trust properties. So land trust as a willing landowner, remember that first step, the biggest hurdle to get over to get a project going? Willing landowner, site control. This is one of the most obvious, but also most valuable role a land trust can play, is offering to do ecological restoration on their land. There's complexities there, and I recognize that, and we'll talk about that in the discussion. Some of the less traditional, maybe less obvious ways a land trust can offer partnerships and restoration expertise. So of those of you who are involved in land trusts in the room, how many have been involved in ecological restoration projects, either in a former sense, former role or current role? Raise your hands. That's great. Yeah, so about a third of the room. That is expertise that can be leveraged either in your particular project or the partnership as a whole, helping to advance ecological restoration overall, right? I mean, I reach out to the head of a land trust in the Buzzards Bay region to talk dam removals in another town all the time, because he used to work on dam removals at a state agency. So that sort of expertise that is found not only, here in this room with people who are involved in the land trust, but maybe your board members. Maybe you're just members of the land trust or members of the community who are involved in the land trust, donors. Being able to extract that expertise and leverage that through the partnership is extremely valuable. Another one, land trusts are respected members of the community. It's a respected organization in the community. And so they have a really good sense of the municipal and political landscape and can help to, I hate to use the term, but sort of grease the skids there a little bit and let us know who to go to get approvals and things that we would need to advance this restoration or at least present it to the town. Same thing with the community, right? I mean, I talked about the second constraint to ecological restoration, and that is community pushback. That's where the land trust can come in and use their community members for outreach and to, really communicate well with the community to get that social acceptance. Let's flip that over. Why would a land trust want to put the capacity and time into being involved in restoration or in a restoration partnership, right? You got to talk to me, and attend meetings and, maybe go on some site visits, which is great. It's great, but it's capacity, and we recognize, particularly local land trusts are capacity limited. Usually 1 to 2 staff, maybe part-time. It's a lot of work. Well, we talked about the expertise, right? If you haven't been involved in restoration and you're sitting next to somebody in a land trust that was working for a state agency doing dam removals, you can get that information firsthand, in these networking events and meetings and things like that. So it's a real, if you're interested in ecological restoration or bringing that back to the table, it's a really great way to sort of get that information. Also visibility, if a lot of times ecological restoration projects, particularly the big ones, get a lot of visibility. Local papers, websites, whatever it may be. And if a land trust is involved, that could incentivize maybe more donations if it, assuming it turns out well, which it often does. You get that raised visibility that you're not only, and I don't want to say not only, you're protecting the land and you're looking to restore ecological function in some way on some of those properties as well. I think it could really incentivize people to get involved, with the land trust. It might help your capacity and resources from that way. Also increase opportunities to protect more land. We're seeing restoration-minded or restoration-focused grants have a land acquisition, allow for land acquisitions with the funding, right? So we partner with a land trust. In our case, Buzzards Bay Coalition owns a lot of land, but we don't want to, it's a lot to manage, right? And so if we can, protect the land and, have a partner land trust own and manage the land, that's great. So there's more money there, more money for resources. Enough money that you could have staff and stewardship staff. So it's really increasing the opportunity to expand the breadth and scope of what these land trusts do, what your land trusts do. And obviously, it increases the capacity to do restoration. My job, my role, is to lend capacity to municipalities and other entities, local land trusts, that want to do restoration. That is my job. And so getting involved in these partnerships increases that capacity to do restoration. There's also opportunities to improve your sites, to improve trails. That's part of the engineering design. Trails, boardwalks, doing things like that. If you have a dam or small culverts on your property, with all this rain that we got in December and January, there's an opportunity to do the ecological restoration, which has the side benefit of mitigating risk. A catastrophic failure of that dam would be really bad. So we'll just take it out, restore the ecological function, and then we're mitigating risk on your property as well. So just a few, there are others, and I'd love to hear, other sort of benefits to land trusts that partner with larger restoration partnerships. But these are the few sort of that were kicking around in my head that, local land trusts could also benefit from these partnerships. So I also want to recognize that not all incentives for ecological restoration are straight linear. It's not land trust wants to do restoration, we're going to do it. Sometimes it could be more of a means to an end with a kind of a win-win benefit for all. And to talk about one such example, I'd like to call up Cynthia Henshaw to talk about a ecological restoration project that the East Quabbin Land Trust is leading. Cynthia, thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Cynthia Henshaw, the Executive Director at the East Quabbin Land Trust. We're a very small land trust covering 8 towns in central Massachusetts. Have you ever done a project where you didn't really know what you were getting into? But you knew you needed to do it anyway? You knew it had to be done for all kinds of reasons. And I don't come from an ecological restoration background. But I come from I know we're doing good stuff, right? So let's just go do it. Let's figure out how to make it happen. So the Wheelwright Pond Dam removal project is a project that the East Quabbin Land Trust is taking on. We've never done ecological restoration at this level. We've pulled lots of invasive plants, right? Just like everybody else, but we've never done something like this. And we got started in 2018. The dam hasn't started to come down yet because we're still in the permitting process. So none of this stuff happens quickly. Do I just click?
Yeah.
Okay. So what I wanted to do was to take my few minutes to kind of orient you to the dam process, and then go back to kind of how we've been working through it, the partnerships and kind of our role and how we're making this all happen. So the Wheelwright Pond Dam, I'm sorry, I don't have, actually, do I have the cursor on the screen here? Can you guys see it? Right, so right here is where the dam is. And you can see this is the Ware River, which is part of the Chicopee River watershed, kind of in the central part of Massachusetts. The dam was built, originally it's for the mill power. The most recently there was a paper mill that was using it, and the paper mill stopped functioning in the 1970s. So this is a basic, a regular hydropower dam for mill construction. It was no longer able, and the current owner did actually look to see whether or not it could be generating electricity. It's, for a variety of reasons, not suitable for that. So the current owner didn't need it anymore. The water, so the mill is right here, and the water backs all the way up to where Route 32 crosses up here in Buried Plains. So it's part of 3 different communities. The town boundary between, this is New Braintree, is kind of in the southern part of the map. Hardwick is in the western part of the map, and Barry is in kind of the northern part of the map. So it's 3 different communities, so it's complex in that way. Let's see, slide. All right, so back to what the dam actually looks like. So this is about 500 feet long. There's 17 feet of height displacement between them. There's a combination of, this is a cement spillway kind of area with the former dam is a timber dam underneath. In this area over here, these are the actual stop logs where you can pull out the logs, 1 foot at a time in order to let the water go down when you have to do dam maintenance, that kind of thing. The dam drains 132 square miles, and it's over 100, by taking out the dam, it would connect over 100 miles worth of cold water fisheries. So I'm hoping that you're understanding that this is a really kind of a big dam. It's got some big impacts. It is not, there are more dams further downstream, so it's not like this is gonna do any anadromous fish kind of connection. But if you go through the statewide wildlife action plans, central Massachusetts, one of our biggest impacts with climate change is gonna be the loss of cold water fisheries. So trying to keep those connected, trying to keep our stream corridors shaded, all of that kind of stuff is really, really important. So, what did we think? Jason went through a whole bunch of reasons about ecological restoration. that's not actually where we came at this project from. So what we were looking at and thinking about were the fact that it was infrastructure that was no longer needed. The landowner, had the dam had been listed as a high hazard dam until they had some more analysis done. And the current owner really didn't want to continue paying for it, right? If you're not using the dam, why do we have this infrastructure? Why am I having to pay to have it inspected every 5 years? The other piece of this is that when you look at the estimated habitat for rare species, the bubble ends right at the dam. Right? So the Ware River has freshwater mussels. It's got special dragonflies. It's got the wood turtles, lots of different species that will benefit by having the dam removed. And then, of course, I already mentioned the reconnecting of the cold water fishery streams. So how did we get into this? So that's kind of like the dam background, kind of what we're trying to do. How do we get into this? The East Quabbin Land Trust works in, again, like I said, central Massachusetts. 4 of our communities have part of the former railroad bed that used to run from Northampton to Boston, right? So it's a great recreational resource. And back when I first started at the Land Trust, we've been working to build out the rail trail, right? Has everybody been on a rail trail? You all know how great they are. They're great for the community. So yes, we love having trails that go up and over hills and over rocks and roots and all of that kind of stuff, but it's really also great to have a place that's accessible for people to be out. I've had calls from members of us who, just had a knee replacement. Well, they needed to go walk on the rail trail to get their exercise. They can't go on our other properties. So we have been really focusing a lot on build out of the Mass Central Rail Trail. And so this is a map of the area. The blue line here is the Mass Central Rail Trail that we had completed. And you can see, of course, it crosses the Ware River, and right here is where the dam is.
Sorry.
Oh, you can't see the cursor. I'm sorry.
Under that purple strip up there.
Can you see the little V in the river? That's the Wheelwright Pond Dam. You got it? And so the water backs up on the backside. And then on the New Braintree side, on the right-hand side of the screen, is where the railroad bed went across, and it was converted into an airport back in the 40s. That's the Tanner Hiller Airport. But that airport was actually built right on the rail trail. So we're coming at this project from a recreational point of view, because the landowner on either side of where our blue line ends, but the purple continues. So the East Quabbin Land Trust owns the purple. The landowner on either side is the guy who owns the dam. And when I go and I talk to him about building out the rail trail, wouldn't that be great? It'd be great for the little village. They could have a little recreation area. They could get access to the river. He says to me, I got to get rid of that dam. So what do? You help him get rid of the dam, right? You just take it on. All right, if that's what's going to make the rail trail go through, because that's our priority, but you need the dam down, let's get the dam down, right? So what did he need? He really needed somebody to call the Division of Ecological Restoration and say, hey, can we take this dam down? How would that work? So I, of course, made that call.
Thank you.
Yeah, six years later, and we're not even into the construction. So I wanted to just put up the partners, and first to talk, so Radio Industrial Park is the landowner for the dam. He's a great guy, and he loves the rail trail. He would love the rail trail to go through, right? So we're trying to this is the win-win-win that Jason was talking about. We're trying to make all of these projects and great benefits happen. We're, of course, not going to do this on our own without the Division of Ecological Restoration. So when Jason says the Land Trust is leading the project, not quite. I made the call. But, the key to all of this is that the Division of Ecological Restoration has that priority project process. And so with that phone call And because I told you about how big this dam is and the impacts to all the ecology, the cold water fisheries, all of the priority habitat, all of that stuff, this removal of this dam is listed as a priority project. So they're really, taking the heavy lift on all of it. And they've helped us find the grant funding to kind of get it where we're at now, and able to put us together with the contractor, with Ty and Bond, some of the folks there who are really knowledgeable about the permitting process, because that's really what's taken a lot of time. And as we get into this, so those are the partners that we're working on. Obviously, we've worked through quite a number of the permitting issues. So the towns are all involved through the notice of intent component and state agencies. But in terms of the partners that are actually working to get the dam down, this is the list. And one of the other complications with this, not only is this a really big dam project with big ecological impact, the little village of Wheelwright also has 800 households who get water from a well that will be impacted by the drop in the Ware River. Just immediately north is a gravel washing facility that uses river water to do the cleaning of the gravel. And so one of the real important lessons that I learned at the very beginning is that, in order for this to work, everybody has to be happy. We have to find solutions for how to to take the dam out, but to mitigate any impacts to the upstream users. We're very fortunate that there actually are no houses or homeowners along the edge. It's a fairly open, wild portion of the river, right? So sometimes in dam projects, removal projects, their backyards, they look out onto the river, onto the lake, and they're not going to want to see it down. So we did not have that kind of opposition in our project. So just to reiterate a little bit, to make sure that you know that the first step is to get the priority project designation that DER helped work through.
First step is to make the call, and you did that.
Okay, we make the call, but then get them, yeah, right, moving along. Maybe I should have said third step or whatever, right? Talk to the landowner, make sure that the landowner wants this to happen. Okay, yeah, you're right, I can change the slide. And then finding some funding, and then also I realized after I put the slide together that I missed one grant fund up there. So the first grant that we were able to get was a dam and seawall grant to kind of get the process moving. We are in the midst of also a New England Forest and Rivers grant from NIFWIF. So that is helping. So we're using all of that money to pay our contractors as we go through the permitting process. And then there's lots of reports that our contractors do, right? So there's sedimentation, hydrology. The bridge design in there is because the East Quabbin Land Trust is interested in continuing the Mass Central Rail Trail. Well, if we're going to take a dam down 200 feet north of where we want to have the bridge crossing, it's kind of frowned upon if you segment those two processes, right? So everybody needs to know that we're trying to take the dam down and get a bridge across at the same location. So doing some of those, having all of those discussions, there's been photo point locations. They've been doing all kinds of things out there to understand. There's a mussel survey that's going to be happening because of the rare mussels downstream, right? You don't want to let all the water go whoosh and take the sediment down and suffocate your mussels, your rare species. So one thing that, and I don't have a good handle on, but I know it happens, is this whole alphabet soup of the permitting process, and this is why you hire consultants. Because I don't know about you guys, but my primary job is to do land conservation and to raise the money to make sure the organization runs, right? So this is just one project. So I know all these things have to happen, and we're working our way through them. Right now, we're waiting on the Chapter 91 license in order to continue to move forward. So the real goal is to get the final permitting so that we can start taking those stop logs down. We want to drop the water above the dam over the next 3 years so that there's not a great big whoosh of water, right? So Jason showed a picture of where a dam came down in a summer. That's not what we're planning on doing. It's a complicated process, but to get the water level down slowly, right? So that vegetation will grow on the exposed soils. And then when the water's down, then physically remove the dam itself. So what has our role been? Just to reiterate again, it's the landowner negotiations, right? I made that first phone call. Keeping him appraised and understanding what happens. I mean, he's got his own job too. He's trying to run his own business. So taking the dam down is also not something that he wants to spend a whole lot of time doing. Yes, talking to the local boards and the citizens, trying to make sure that everybody understands why it's important so that there is good buy-in. Again, we were had the good fortune of not having too many houses next to it, so we didn't have, we've had one person who is not happy about it, and partly that's because there's not gonna be a flat water paddle behind the dam anymore, right? It's all gonna be white water, and I said, okay, you know, what are you gonna do? That is the way it's gonna go when the dam comes down. We help support with logistics. So there was, we did host a public information meeting, so making sure that everybody in all the communities knew about it, the press releases, that kind of stuff, getting the room, those sorts of things. And then, of course, being able to hold the grant funding. So the dam owner is a private owner, not eligible for these grant funds that are essential to getting all the permitting done. And so that's from my point of view, that's kind of the key role that we were able to play or have been playing, is to be able to accept the grant funding, work through all of those pieces, the grant reporting and all of that kind of stuff, with huge support from DER, and of course our contractor Time Bond helps with all of those kinds of things too. So that's what we've been doing.
Awesome, thank you, Cynthia. And just to clarify a little bit, lead, I mean, it's a lead role for sure. I mean, making that first call, all of us, even those of us who are, I say steeped or involved in ecological restoration, have have ecologists on staff, rely on consultants and engineers to do the planning, to do the permitting and sort through all that. We all rely on them, and we're not expected to know all that. The more we know, the more we can contribute. And this is where the partnership thing comes in again, because we can learn about permitting and what goes into that, how to read a design document, things of that nature. But it's, I think the leadership role, especially with the community interfacing, is really important. And that's great also that the land trust was the entity to receive and administer the grants. I mean, that's another sort of what is the role of land trust in the ecological landscape. That's another one to put, on the next slide. That's a really great one. So I'd like to introduce Colleen Andrews, the operations manager at the Mattapoisett Land Trust now. MLT is an active partner in the Buzzards Bay Watershed Restoration Partnership and is leading a salt marsh restoration project. Leading? Yeah. Yep. Leading a salt marsh. I just wanted to make sure I had that right. Yeah, taking a very lead role and leading a salt marsh restoration project with a bit of support from the partnership and BBC. So, Colleen.
All right. Hi, everybody. I am Colleen. I'm the operations manager for the Mattapoisett Land Trust, and I am going to give you an overview of a salt marsh habitat restoration study and a tandem study happening at the same time on a salt marsh system in Mattapoisett, which is located within the Buzzards Bay watershed. It was on one of those maps that Jason showed to start off, and it is an interesting site. So this is just to kind of orient you with what we're talking about here. On the left, you can see an aerial photo of the salt marsh system that we're looking at for restoration. It is a really big system, and it's really complex. It is about 250 acres of salt marsh from end to end. It's a little over 1.5 miles long, so it's a really large system. And then on the right-hand side, you can see kind of a confusing looking map, but this is important to point out because it ties in with everything that we've talked about so far, is the land ownership in this site. So the red outline just shows you what we're looking at for the study area. And within that, you can see on the western side of the marsh, both the purple and the pink colored areas, that is all land that is owned and held in fee by the Mattapoisett Land Trust. I think about 130, 140 acres or so. It's owned outright by the Land Trust. Both of those sections have conservation restrictions on them as well. So the southern portion, all in purple, is a CR held by the Mass Division of Fish and Wildlife. The northern pink area, there's a CR held by the Buzzards Bay Coalition. Moving around there, you can see a little green triangle at the top. That is conservation land that is owned by the town of Mattapoisett. And then below that, on the eastern side of the marsh, everything in blue there is a private landowner, but it is land that has a CR that's jointly held by the Mattapoisett Land Trust and the Buzzards Bay Coalition together. So that is conservation land, despite it being a private owner. So that's just to orient you with what we're talking about here, the size of the site. It is just another thing to point out while we're looking at the photo. On the left, the northern area of the marsh is fed by the Mattapoisett Harbor. In the southern area, you can see the water on the right-hand side. That is called Hammond's Cove. So this marsh sees tidal action on both ends. All right, so we're obviously talking restoration because there are problems happening at the site. And these are some of them. This is a really interesting salt marsh, and it's a little bit sad when you see all these things that are going wrong with it. It is suffering just from a lot of water. This is a really wet system, and it's really complicated hydrologically. So it is being affected by prolonged tidal attenuation. There are 2 culverts at the north of the marsh, one of which is severely undersized and is failing, and it is letting water in at the high tide, and the marsh sees nearly a full high tide, but it's that low tide period that the marsh is suffering. There's attenuation, it's not draining fully, and it's not draining quickly enough. So with that, along with a lot of groundwater, some stormwater inputs, fresh water, this marsh is just not draining properly, and it's causing marsh subsidence. It's stunting a lot of vegetation growth throughout the whole system. There is persistent ponding on the marsh surface in areas throughout the whole system where water is getting in there either from tidal action or from rain and weather, and it's just sitting. It's not draining off the marsh surface. It's not able to get into those deep channels that you saw in that first picture. So all of that, as well as sea level rise, which exacerbates every one of those issues that I just named. And we also have an interesting thing happening. There's a lot of mudflat expansion at the southern end of the marsh due to a lot of that tidal action, sea level rise, improper drainage, but also due in part to some crab populations in the marsh. We have a lot of fiddler crabs that burrow in the embankments of the channels, and we also have an unknown number, but there's a population of purple marsh crabs in this marsh as well, and they are herbivorous, so they are eating at some of the vegetation growing in the marsh. And there's just these expanding areas of mudflats, which you can kind of see in the photo on the bottom there. And at the top, you can see that's the marsh, and it looks like the harbor. So there's an issue with water, there's an issue with mudflats, and we needed to figure out how to fix this. It's a really visible property. It's on a main road called Mattapoisett Neck Road, so it sees a lot of attention. People are concerned that private landowner on the eastern side of the marsh, they are a friend of the land trust. We have a really close relationship with them, and they are oyster farmers. So they're out in that southern Hammond's Cove all the time, and they've been watching this marsh just suffer for years, and they've been a proponent of, we got to do something. You guys have to, what do we do? They come to us and ask, what do we do? And then we have to turn around and say, what do we do? And that's where these 2 tandem studies come in. So the Buzzards Bay Coalition is leading a hydrologic and hydraulic study, or an H&H study, on the marsh, just to really figure out the complicated hydrology of the system, with the 2 culverts at the top, the tidal influx at the bottom as well, stormwater inputs from a neighborhood to the west of the marsh. There's a lot of water, and so they undertook an H&H study that was funded by DER to figure out what was happening. And the end goal of that is a 25% redesign of that failing culvert that I mentioned. That's causing just a really obvious impact, a negative impact to the marsh. So that's one of the goals of that study. And that H&H study feeds directly into the Land Trust's led salt marsh restoration study. Both of these are being contracted through Woods Hole Group. So we've got a really tight-knit group of people working on both of these projects in tandem. And it's been really helpful to work back and forth. So the salt marsh study itself is taking information from the H&H study to understand the system better. They've mapped the current conditions. They're mapping, sea level rise predictions. And what we want out of this at the end is 5 actionable and permittable restoration options, which that's where it can get tricky, but that's why we want to undertake this. We want to know what are the priorities, what are the things that we can actually do, and what can we get permitted within the next 5 to 10 years. So these are just some maps that have come out of the study so far. On the left, you can see the current conditions of the marsh. All of the light green area is salt marsh that was mapped by Woods Hole Group with aerial photos and on the ground truth RTK data. And the lime green areas you'll see are kind of fringing stands of Phragmites. So there are invasive plants in this marsh. They're kind of kept to those areas, and that's an indicator of freshwater inputs in those spots. And then you can sort of see around the entire system is a blue area, and that is all bordering vegetated wetland. So there's that freshwater edge surrounding this whole system. And then on the right, this is just the mass coastal flood risk model that the Woods Hole Group ran for us. And this is showing mean high water benchmark in kind of, the severe case of sea level rise. They want to kind of see the worst case scenario. So what this shows is the 2030, 2050, and 2070 mean high water benchmarks that this marsh will see. So you can see in some areas it really extends far inland, but around a lot of the marsh, there's not a ton of inland action or inland movement of that mean high water line. So that's all to say, and it's going to feed into some of the potential restoration options I'll talk about next. But those areas where there's not a lot of distance between those predicted high water lines, we wouldn't predict the salt marsh to be able to migrate inland there. However, the areas where you do see a lot of distance between those high water benchmarks, that may have some potential for salt marsh migration. So that's just one of the things we were trying to identify with this comprehensive study. And some of the solutions that are being floated right now, because both of these studies are still preliminary, nothing has been finalized yet, they're still underway. So these are all ideas we're tossing about right now. And we've really utilized the partnership that's been established and beyond that to talk about potential restoration activities. So in this comprehensive study, the researchers at Woods Hole Group, they want all of the information that they can get. So we've been, involving salt marsh professionals from other states, from our own neighborhoods, from other organizations, from our town, highway department, from the National Estuary Program in Buzzards Bay, to bounce all of these possibilities off of. We want to know, this is what we think we could do here. This is what Woods Hole Group identifies as some actions to take. We want to talk to the folks that have done it successfully, who have experience permitting it, who might have suggestions of what to do, what not to do in this system. So some of the ideas that have come out are obviously the resizing of that culvert. That's pretty much a definite. That's going to be one of our 5 actionable restoration items that comes out of this. And that's thanks to the H&H study and the data from that. Other possibilities we're kind of floating around right now are those pathways for marsh migration, whether just identifying them is enough or doing more to encourage marsh migration. That's a question that's on the table. One thing that the Land Trust is interested in is helping to reestablish some drainage pathways off the surface of the marsh. and into those existing channels via runneling. That's something that, we've been floating around. We're interested in it. The Buzzards Bay Coalition has done that successfully at a couple sites in the Buzzards Bay watershed. So we were going to them and others as experts in that to figure out if that's a solution that would work in this system. Because of those ponded areas and a lot of that water that just sits on the marsh surface for hours to days and doesn't drain off naturally, how can we encourage that to drain so that the vegetation can bounce back? Because although this system is going to be affected by sea level rise and we will lose, a significant portion of this marsh in the future, that's the future. We can do a lot in the interim, so that's our focus here, is how can we make this a functioning, healthy salt marsh system for as long as we have it. And then just a couple other things where those areas of Phragmites, those could be potential treatment areas to remove that vegetation. There is potential for stormwater management at this site. And then, it's a very large question mark, but is there potential for crab management or crab mitigation and the damage that's causing? So those are some of the solutions we're floating right now. I'm sure others will come up as we're, tying up this project. But let's go to the next slide. Really why this is all working and why we feel pretty confident that we're going to get some good restoration activities and next steps out of this salt marsh study is because of the partners listed in the middle there. So the two project leads, the Mattapoisett Land Trust and the Buzzards Bay Coalition, we already have established a great working relationship. And this was just kind of kismet to work on this system. It's such a huge system. It's one of the most degraded salt marshes in the Buzzards Bay watershed. We have a vested interest in it as the landowner, and so does the Buzzards Bay Coalition from a science perspective. They've been collecting data on this site for years. We are working closely with our town administration in Mattapoisett and our Public Works Department, which is our highway department. The Land Trust ourselves has a really close relationship with these people, and we kind of know how they work. We know them on a personal level and on a working level, and we understand, what will it take for them to go for this? And really what that is what benefits them, what benefits the town, the municipality. So, with the funding from CZM and DER, we work with these partners. Included in that is the Buzzards Bay National Estuary Program and the Plymouth County Mosquito Control Project. Both of those groups have a lot of historical data on the site that they've been collecting for different reasons, but that data and that information is really fed into the salt marsh study. And we have the land ownership. I showed you that map at the beginning. That's huge. That's why we are even talking about this right now, is because of the land trust ownership, the conservation restrictions on the land, the agreeableness of that private landowner on the east side of the marsh. They want us to do this, so we should undertake it. We have municipal buy-in because of the culvert problem mainly. The town is aware of the undersized culvert. They know it's failing. That is on their extremely long list of things to get to in the town. The reason that hasn't been done already is because of the cost. So if we can offer them, studies and data and a 25% design by an engineering firm and potential funding to get this done, to them that's we'll move that up on the list then. If it's doable and you can give us some money to do it and do it the right way, it's really attractive to them. If we just were telling them that that culvert really needs to be replaced, that could take 15 years. That could take until it fails for them to get to it. So there is municipal buy-in and benefit there. And then just the common thread through this whole presentation is the partnership support. So we are a small land trust. We're contained to just Mattapoisett. We're led by a board of directors, and there is one employee, which is myself. So our capacity is very limited. And we are able to use folks like the Buzzards Bay Coalition to conduct these tandem studies. Really, one couldn't happen successfully without the other. So we have that partnership. We have the resources to talk to other professionals within that stakeholder network. And we have that connection with the town. So it bridges all those gaps, and it's bringing a lot of great minds together to hopefully get some good potential restoration actions out of this. And that is where I will leave you. I'll hand it back over to Jason.
Great. Thank you, Colleen. That was great. As I tuck my shirt back in. That's a really great example of sort of that regional partnership and how it supports restoration. You know, MLT, Mattapoisett Land Trust, embarked on this and got a good grant for the planning phase and then conceptual design. But we didn't have money for the H&H, which is kind of needed for that conceptual design to be really effective. And that's where the partnership with support from DER and Buzzards Bay Coalition brought that to the table as well to integrate that. So it was a really good example of that partnership, like Colleen said. And yeah, the interface with the town, I mean, that's the only road down to the communities that live on Mattapoisett Neck, is Mattapoisett Neck Road. So it's a public safety thing as well. You know, flooding of that culvert and failure of that culvert would be a disaster for the folks who live down there. So getting the town buy-in and having MLT kind of leading that with the highway department and others was critical to the project. All right, so I'm gonna go pretty fast to the next part of this so we can leave some room for discussion. So I want to talk next, and this is the discussion phase, so I hope you all feel empowered to participate, throw your hands up, and talk through this. How can we create these pathways for land trust as restoration partners? And what are some of the hurdles and challenges that we see for land trust to be able to sort of jump into the restoration space, the ecological restoration space? Capacity, obviously. I mean, one employee, I think this is a pretty common thread in local land trusts. My town, Tiverton, Rhode Island, just hired their first full-time employee for, their land conservation end. So we recognize that's an issue. That's why I'm here. That's why the partnerships are being formed. This is one I kind of want to spend a little bit of time on. I actually spoke to somebody in the parking garage from the Seekonk Land Trust, and she said, we don't get involved because it's not part of our vision. It's not in our mission statement. We conserve land and protect land, but we don't, restoration isn't really on our view. So I'm wondering, those involved in land trust, how many have vision and mission statements? Just put your hands up. I mean, I assume all of you. How many have ecological restoration as part of that vision or mission statement? Right. So it might be in that pathway, it might be a hard sell, right? To sort of bring ecological restoration as the next logical step where it's needed. It's not needed everywhere. I mean, sometimes you conserve a piece of land and that's all that's needed. But sometimes, if a river runs through it, there might be an opportunity for restoration there as well. Understanding the process. This occurred to me at 11 o'clock last night when I was trying to sleep. I'm like, wait a minute. I assume as a restoration practitioner that everybody understands the process, the engineering process, right? How the stepwise approach goes and where critical partners have a say. And this is really, really important because this is a really simplified version of how a larger scale ecological restoration project would go. There would be contracting an engineering firm. We would have a big kickoff meeting with all the critical partners, landowners, if they want to be part of it, and hopefully if it's a land trust, you would. And other stakeholders, funders, other technical experts would be at this project kickoff meeting. And then out of that would come a pretty lengthy data collection phase, survey, putting water level loggers in if that's appropriate, and doing a lot of data collection and modeling to inform an early conceptual design, like Colleen was talking about for that culvert on Mattapoisett Neck Road. It's at this point where nothing is set in stone, and input from the landowner and land trust on alternatives designs. Usually there's a few options that come out of here. We call them alternatives, and a preferred alternative is moved forward. But it doesn't move forward until we get input from everybody, including the public. We'll have public meetings at this phase, but also solicit input from the partners along the way. And this is really critical to communicate because we as restoration practitioners are not trying to shove a design down the throat of people who own the land. That's not how it works at all. We want input and buy-in at every stage in the process because ultimately it's your land, right? And if we can improve your land ecologically, but also improve access, improve other aspects of it, we want to incorporate that into the design. Then it goes to advanced engineering design, another opportunity, formal opportunity for public input and, you know, the landowner and others, the technical team to offer input into that near final design. That's kind of what it's going to look like. But by the time it reaches there, there are opportunities for input along the way. And it doesn't move forward unless everybody's satisfied, right? I mean, it just frankly doesn't. And then, you know, permitting, final design, and construction. And hopefully by that time, everybody really likes what the end product is going to look like. So I just put this up here because it's very important for people to understand the process that happens before anybody puts a shovel in the dirt. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity to say how this is going to go, and it's not just up to the consultant or the people leading the restoration. It's public input that drives that as well. We might not be able to satisfy everybody, right? I mean, can't flat water kayak above a dam when you take it out because it turns into a river, but we certainly want input from everybody and consider that input. But as a landowner, I mean, that input is critical because if you say, I'm not willing anymore, that stops the project in its tracks. So I think, you know, the understanding the process is critical, understanding the benefits and outcomes, which we kind of went over. I think that's a little easier to communicate before and after pictures, right? Like here's what it's going to look like, you know, ecological end of it. The disturbance of properties, and this kind of, you know, happens in the construction phase. I'm guessing that's a big one too, right? From just a nod of heads, the people in land trusts, you don't want to see your properties that are used a lot and, you know, restrict access and then disturb those properties, you know, for a temporary amount of time on the other end. I think that is where there's a little bit of a salesman approach to restoration. We got to come in and inform people that, look, yes, it is going to be a little messy in the interim, but the benefits way outweigh that temporary period of you know, sort of disturbance. And we've come up with strategies at Butters Bay Coalition on how to get around that. We have a property right now that's very popular for a number of years. I think like 10 years we've owned it. It's a cranberry bog. And we finally got the funding and go and permitting to do the restoration. So we had to close it. It was in the town of Mattapoisett. Wasn't easy. A lot of people use that, love to walk their dogs along the berms. You know, it looked beautiful, but ecologically it was not functioning. We offered on the signage nearby alternative trails and networks to go to, including land trust properties, other BBC properties. And that seemed to be pretty effective and well received. So thinking strategically on when this happens, how to communicate and how to get those things out there. All right, pathways. And this is pretty much what I'll end with. Partnerships are obviously a pathway, I think, for learning about restoration and maybe thinking about how to communicate when partnerships are formed around specific projects, how to communicate to the broader public. But how should we communicate? What's the best way? Like, is this helpful? Are forums like this helpful to be able to bring back this information to land trust memberships? I don't know. Anybody have any thoughts or suggestions on how people in the restoration profession can help to have land trust membership boards, donors understand ecological restoration, hoping that a land trust will be more amenable to it? I mean, is there any thought?
Or public talks.
Public talks, yeah. Like in a town, like bringing the idea just as a holistic thing, like what it means. That's great, yeah.
Yeah, I think your before and after pictures probably mean a lot to, you know, the public if they can see what it looked like before and then, you know, what the after is going to look like. And I know that we're still early in the process of doing ecological restoration.
Right.
So sometimes that can be hard to
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to learn, right? Especially salt marsh restoration. I mean, we are on the early phase of can we create marsh migration pathways? So that's a great point.
I would say the before and after pictures of other areas where it worked, even if it's not in your specific location, but because you can have those like design, you know, schematics that are given by the contractors that are great.
Yep.
But unless people can see that proof of concept of like, look, you know, this cranberry bog restoration worked super well, you know, here in Falmouth or something, then you can like see that's
Right, right, right. Yeah, we actually had an example of a project, a couple dam removals on the lower stem of a brook in the Buzzards Bay watershed. Land Trust owned half of one dam and the entirety of another dam. They were supportive of the project overall, but we were going after funding, and they were hesitant to give us documented support, letter of support, for that funding opportunity. And what we did is the president of Buzzards Bay Coalition and the VP of Watershed Protection went to a board meeting and sat in front of the board and did a similar sort of presentation as this. What's the benefits of ecological restoration? What is this dam removal going to look like? What's the time frame? When can you have input? And it really turned the tide there, and we had a letter of support the next day. But I think the forums for sharing that information, I guess, and the mechanics of it is something that I think these partnerships should really think about, because, again, I think we assume you all know the process and that it's going to be easy. Like, why wouldn't you support restoration? Well, because you don't want this disturbance on the property and it to look like something completely different at the other end, right? It makes a lot of sense once we sit down and think about it. So that's a takeaway for me and for those in the room who are on the restoration side of things. I think to keep that in mind and to think critically about how we can interface with land trusts to educate or inform the base about what restoration looks like at the end and the benefits of it coming through. So with that, I'd like to say thank you. I think we're kind of getting near the time, right?
7 minutes.
7 minutes. All right. Yeah, that's great. That's great. Weeantic River Reserve in Wareham. I just wanted to leave you with a beautiful picture because it looks a little different than outside today, right? Big dam removal project, worked out really well. This is one of the after shots that, could be really encouraging to a land trust. So thank you all for your time. Thank you for attending. I hope you got a little something out of this, and we'd be happy, Cynthia, Colleen, and I, to take any questions you might have.
Have you heard of this, they did a dam removal along the Clermont River in Northern California?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, now apparently, things went bad.
Did they? Okay.
And,
I know the river system. I don't know the specific project.
yeah, it was done too abruptly, and a boatload of sediment just wasted
It's a
the
great-
downstream.
Yeah.
And there's fish kills and all that sort of. Now, I'm not saying, of course, I'm a huge devout believer in restoration.
Right.
okay? But I just thought, the lesson learned there, I think, is do it carefully, because politically, there was a big black eye, what happened. in that
For
project.
ecological restoration,
So I guess
dam
my
removal.
question
Yeah.
is, are there instances that you know of, or in Massachusetts, where a restoration kind of ran into some problems, maybe counterproductive?
Every restoration runs into problems. Almost every, right? Almost every restoration has its challenges, and we have this thing called adaptive management that is needed.
One of my
all
favorite
that-
terms.
Yeah, right? We had that cranberry bog project I talked about in Mattapoisett. We had, 6 inches of rain between the two storms in December and January. It was a construction site at that point. It was not a functioning wetland. And so that was a lot of water coming on the site that had to go somewhere, and, it went places we didn't intend it to, right? So a little sideways, we rectified it, we fixed it, had to have talks with the town. Have to be careful of that. To that specific instance, this project here, when we removed this dam, we were cognizant of lowering the water level slowly, precisely for that sediment reason, to not have all the sediment go downstream at once, to do a really slow lowering, have the sediment go out over time. So I don't know if it was exactly learned from that particular project, but the learnings that come from those can be applied to future ecological restorations. I just want to say one quick thing about the partnerships too before I forget. I want to give a shout out to Mass DER, who funds these partnerships, and the partnerships program that funds the 3 partnerships that I talked about earlier is going to be expanding. So they're going to be putting on an RFR really soon for additional regional restoration partnerships. So those of you who are interested and not involved, keep an eye out for that, and start thinking about potentially joining or forming a restoration partnership, kind of like what myself and Matthew here have, and coordinate in other areas of the state. So I just want to shout that out. Yeah, you had a question?
Yeah, I was curious. So Cynthia did a great job of like talking about that phone call, that first like start. And I
Right.
was curious with Colleen's example, where was that initiation in terms of the funding? Like who initiated it and who was like, I'm gonna write the grant and then get the partners in, or just that like that mechanics of how that works?
So I can speak to that a little bit. I was not the one who did the grant writing for this project. That was the president of the Land Trust, Mike Huguenin, couldn't be here today. But he does pretty much all of the grant writing for our land trust. He also helps to write grants for the town for funding to get them these types of projects that are ecologically beneficial and benefit town infrastructure. So
Actually, on the culverts.
yeah, it was kind of a known issue. I mean, like I said, the landowner has been pointing it out to us for years. Right next to their oyster farm, they're just seeing this mud flat grow and grow and grow. And they're concerned because it is their property, so they want to know what's happening, what we can do to fix it. And also that aerial photo at the beginning that was taken from the Plymouth County Mosquito Control Project's plane.
Yeah, you can see the sprayers.
Yeah, so that was their plane. They do these flyover surveys. And
This is where it is on the
Yes.
map. Yeah, yeah. And if you don't mind, I can. So this is one of the first things we did in the partnership, and the culvert and the salt marsh came up as priorities. And being such an active member in the partnership, I think catalyzed that as one of the first projects that the partnership was going to undertake. DER gives us a little seed funding for that. So, and that combined with a little bit of other funding, we had money for the H&H. Mattapoisett Land Trust is very active in going after a CZM grant. So it really came together through that partnership. Now, Buzzards Bay Coalition has worked with MLT on a number of projects, so we're very familiar with each other, but it really came through the partnership process of sort of identifying high priorities, where is there sort of capacity to write grants and whatnot, and kind of came out of that, so, yeah.
we did have the just existing knowledge that we knew there's problems here. We're getting feedback from the mosquito control group, from landowners. We see it ourselves. It comes up highly ranked in this restoration potential. And so it's just a lot of factors came together
Right.
to make it happen.
And I will say too about this this analysis, it's definitely not quantitative, it's a qualitative analysis, but a lot of input from the members of the land trust that are members of the partnership was incorporated here as well. Knowing MLT and Garrett from Highway had their eyes on this culvert, that's why we took a closer look at it too and got it up, as a high priority. So, yeah. Thanks, Colleen. Yes.
I have a question. Colleen mentioned that they hope that there's a CR on the property that they're doing the restoration work on. Has that
Ooh.
caused any,
I know where you're going with this, I
have
think.
a lot
Yeah.
of questions about this
Yeah.
part.
Yeah.
How do you work the restoration project into, to address some of the restrictions and the conservation
Yeah.
restrictions?
So I'm going to say something to every land trust here right now that might be involved or might want to be involved in restoration in the future. Make that a part of your CRs, please. It makes it so much easier,
what-
right? Yeah.
Restoration-
Make restoration activities permittable in your conservation restriction language,
Okay.
right? And I think that was the case
Yeah.
with this CR.
I
It
can
was,
speak to that a little bit.
Yeah,
So
please.
there's these different CRs that I was pointing out on there. There's Buzzards Bay CR, there's a dual one with the coalition and MLT, and then there's also Division of Fish and Wildlife.
Right.
These are all implemented at different times when the land was acquired, so as they get newer, that restoration is mentioned. But with like the.
Division of Fisheries and Wildlife?
No, not
No.
mentioned, but
No.
it's not, there's not specific mention of not allowing it. So this is something that we're reviewing this documentation as we're creating this plan. Because, we're working with the state, they're funding this.
Right.
So
Yeah, no, I
they have
understand
interest
that.
in it, so
Yeah.
it is a hurdle. But I've noticed that from going through the CRs. The older ones, they don't mention it, but they also say, you can farm the land still, or you can mow pathways and cut down the viewscape. They're dated. But as they get newer, that mention of restoration is in there, and I think like Jason said, it's crucial.
it's a fantastic point, and thank you for bringing that up, because that
Well,
is critical.
And certainly I can see it might be easier to get around with like dam removal, because dam removal is popular right now. DER is doing a lot of that.
Right.
I have one in my own town that's being removed. working on not a dam removal.
Exactly, yeah.
I mean, DER has certainly assisted us in other projects that don't involve rivers and dams,
Mhm.
but, you know, how do you manage restoration in an upland
Right, yeah.
or a forest?
Yeah, yeah, definitely looking at the CR first, and I don't know the legal end of changing CRs, if it's even possible. Yeah, we have lawyers that do that, right? Like, I don't get into that. But I would encourage, as new acquisitions come online, that there's some provision in there to allow ecological restoration to
Have a
happen.
bigger land trust with a bigger budget for lawyers. Yes, they do.
We do, yeah, we do, but we're encouraging smaller land trusts to add that provision in as lands are acquired, if, hopefully if they have the restoration in mind. Thank you. That's a great point, yeah. Another thing that can stop a restoration in its tracks, right? Like, you can't do it. Yeah.
We're gonna have to wrap up there.
All right.
11:50, yeah.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of the